Now we move to what we call the silent years. What do I mean by the silent years? The years where there's no prophets. Now it's going to turn into pure history when heaven is completely quiet and Israel has to sort things through. It's a very tough time, one of the toughest time in the history of the Israel and the people of God. So this time started from the exile and the post-exilic prophets all the way to the coming of Christ. This is we're talking about 400, 500 years. So we're gonna talk about what happened after the exile. The exile, what we call the Babylonian exile. We're gonna go back and rehash the main points of the exile events. The Babylonian exile is the name generally given to the deportation and the exile of the Jews. I think these are pieces taken from Nelson maps and charts. It's very straightforward quotation from there. The Babylonian exile is the name generally given to the deportation and exile of the Jews of the ancient kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar II, the man who conquered all this area and established the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian exile is distinguished from the earlier exile of citizens of the northern kingdom of Israel to Assyria around 722 BC. It should be BC, not BCE. Difference: BC is before Christ, BCE before Common Era. Before Common Era, we don't talk about Common Era. We talk about the year of the Lord. So it's before Christ. We need to remove that E. The exile in Babylon, which directly affected mainly those of the upper class of society. So what the Nebuchadnezzar had done is took the noblemen of Jerusalem with him to Babylon, left the poorest of the poor, people who are not educated, they're not learned, they have no craft. He left them in the country. So the country was left very poor and illiterate and weak. So nobody can plan for a revolt against them anymore. It happened in 3 waves, and the return would be in 3 waves. So he took them in 3 portions, 3 trips. When they started rebelling against them, the Bible portrays the internal cause of the captivity as the sins of Judah and failing to rid itself of idolatry and refusing to heed prophetic warnings not to rebel against Babylon. This was mainly Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, you know why you're going to be taken out of here? And he listed all the breaking of the commandments that they had done. So in exile, there were at least 2 kingdoms, 2 empires that will take turn in ruling over the area and in maintaining the exile. First period is called the Babylonian period. This period is under the rule of the Babylonian Empire. And this started from 606. We're going back to 536, 70 years. This is exactly what Jeremiah had prophesied. He said, you will have 70 years in exile. And why? What was the reason that God decreed 70 years on Israel? Jeremiah explained. He said, Moses in the law that God gave said to rest the ground, don't plant anything in it, 1 year every 7 years. So you have to rest it the 7th year. You plant it 6 years, but in the 6th year, God will make sure that you get enough food that it will last you that 1 whole year until you start planting and sowing and harvesting again, which is something that happened similar in the wandering. When they were collecting on the 6th day, double the portion that they would collect every day of manna, so that the Friday portion of manna would cover them also Saturday. Same thing for the land. When they come into the promised land, they would have to work all the 6 years, and the 7th year, because it's a Sabbath, it's a rest year, they have to rest the land. The land should not be cultivated. So what happened? Jeremiah said, you didn't keep this law. You worked the land in the 7th year. You never had to stop the land at all. You never stopped cultivating the land. So there was actually 70 years of collected or indebted time of rest. Do you get that? So how many years do you think they spend in the land since they entered the promised land until the exile? How many years? If every 7 years, they have to rest 1 year. So they counted all the years, they came up to 70 years. He said, you're going to be out of the land, and the land will have to rest against your wishes. 70 years. If we know that it's 1 in 7, so how many years do you think they spent in the land without taking that year? Do the math. 490 years, exactly. So it's almost 500 years they've been in the promised land. They had not rested the land every 7th year. So that accumulated to 70 years of exile. This is the reason why Jeremiah had predicted this will be the time. When Daniel looked at the book of Jeremiah, I said, the 70 years are up. What's going on now? And in this, when the kingdom of Babylon ended and Persia started taking over, and the first king in Persia, Cyrus, was moved, God moved him to turn everybody back to their country and their land and to build their temple. This is exactly what happened. So the prophecy of Jeremiah regarding captivity, you can read about it in the reference. The second, the stages of captivity, one under Jehoiakim, which is the son of Josiah, and this from 606 to 597, 9 years. And in this time, Daniel was taken from Jerusalem. And his son, Jehoiachin, this was 597, 586. During this 11 years, Ezekiel was taken. And then the last and the final one, during Zedekiah, the uncle, the brother of Jehoiakim, and this from 586 to 536, 50 years. Jerusalem and the temple were burned in the third wave of exile. So 3 waves of exile under 3 kings. This was maybe right at the end of the life of Jehoiakim and the beginning of the second. Jehoiakim never got to rule in Jerusalem. When we talk about the empires that ruled, the first empire was Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar the first, and the 3 exiles happened under him from 605 to 562. His son, his name is Belshazzar. They say his son, but actually he was his grandson. History records that he was actually the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, and he reigned with his father Nabonidus. Nabonidus was gone most of the time on campaigns. He hated being in Babylon. He lived in another city, and he ruled. He didn't want to rule, actually. His son Belshazzar was a co-reigning king with his father. That's why in history they were very, very confused, because the Bible said there that something about that, and they didn't understand until they uncovered certain things in Babylon in the excavation, and they found that he was actually co-reigning. Belshazzar was co-reigning with his father. A grandfather is generally referred as father in the scripture in the Bible. The second kingdom is Persia, starting with Cyrus. That's from the period, so you end up in 539. 536, Persian Empire started to 334. That's 200 years. 200 years of Persian rule. The first one is Cyrus. Cyrus, then Darius, then Artaxerxes. Cyrus, he ordered the rebuilding of the temple. He ruled Persia all the way to 530. Darius, he completed the building of the temple in his reign, and he ruled all the way to 486. Artaxerxes, he started in his time, the temple was adorned and beautified. And also in his time, the city was built. He is the same as, that's not the same. There's, or the Bible will call him Xerxes or Ahasuerus. The returns are 3. So they're returning from, there's 2 ruling kingdoms during the exile, Babylonia and Persia. And they return through during the time of Persia. The first return under Zerubbabel, we'll talk about Zerubbabel soon. And this was 536 to 516. The deliverance of the Jews under Esther, that's the same, almost the same time that, or time after it, came after that. And this may be under the time, during the time of Nehemiah. So the second return under Ezra the scribe, the priest, and there's an interval of time there was nothing happening. And then the third return is under Nehemiah. So you got Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah, 3 returns. And the final word of Malachi, the last of the prophets, came at the end of this time, at the time of Nehemiah. So Malachi and Nehemiah were partners, while Haggai is in the time of Zerubbabel. Zechariah also was the time of Zerubbabel. So Zechariah and Haggai was up here, and Malachi was in the time of Nehemiah at the end. And all these are references from the Bible if you want to go and read. So this is the first piece that I want to tell you. I'm not going to ask you for the years, but at least for the sequence of events. So from the outside, let me review this very quickly. The exile happened under the Babylonian rule of Nebuchadnezzar. And in his time, there were 3 kings, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, that's his son, and Zedekiah, that's the brother of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim and Zedekiah were the children of Josiah. Jehoiakim was the grandchild of Josiah, the son of Jehoiakim. And during their time, there were 3 exiles. One, when Daniel was taken. The second, Ezekiel was taken. And the third is where the Jerusalem and the temple were completely burned. When they spent the 70 years of exile, there were 2 ruling kingdoms, Babylon and Persia. And there were 4 decrees of return. The first one by the Cyrus, and we talked about Cyrus as the anointed of the Lord, where God actually called Cyrus to have people return back and build the temple. Then Darius, and then eventual Artaxerxes or Artaxerxes. And in his time, the temple was finished, and the city was, this is the time of Nehemiah, the time of Nehemiah. So this also happened in the time of Esther. The second return under Ezra, and this corresponds to, so this is 48-47. This is during this time, during this king. So the first one in the 600, and this is during Cyrus. This is the beginning. Zerubbabel is the one who commissioned Cyrus. Darius is the one who commissioned Ezra. And the last one, Xerxes or Artaxerxes, is the one that commissioned Nehemiah during the time of Queen Esther. And Malachi comes to finish this, while Haggai and Zechariah are in the beginning, when they were actually doing. Zechariah speaks a lot about Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest. Zechariah mentions Zerubbabel by name. So you have that. And Haggai talks about building the temple. So you have them in the beginning. The temple that was rebuilt is named under Zerubbabel. Who is Zerubbabel? He's the grandchild of? Anybody knows? He's the grandchild of this king. So Jehoiakim has a son, and the son had a son, the grandson of Jehoiakim. His name is Zerubbabel. So he's from the line of David. He is a royal person. People got so excited when Zerubbabel was appointed the governor of Judea, and they thought, okay, the kingdom is coming back. The line of David is coming back, the return of the king. But then they got disappointed because Zerubbabel was called back to Babylon, never to be seen again in the area. We'll talk about that in a second.